The assumption is that at this point an apocalypse occurred, around 2100 BC. A very powerful earthquake. The continent in the middle of the Atlantic, Plato's Atlantis, sank. Gigantic tsunamis rose. In Central America, entire cities were swept by the waves in minutes. The whole of Egypt was brought down by this tremor, which caused the granite coverings to fall off of the Menkaure pyramid. The Ipuwer papyrus describes an apocalyptic landscape. All good things are gone. There is not one black fingernail left. The plague hit the whole country. There is blood everywhere. The river is blood. The country is without light. All over Earth, the remains collapsed except the most massive. The whole planet was shaken. Ocean levels rose. Coastal towns were overwhelmed by the waters in a few days. Civilizations recovered slowly from this cataclysm. Thales of Miletus, Pythagoras, Plato, Solon, Archimedes, Hippocrates, and hundreds of others stayed for 15 or 20 years in Egypt, not like tourists on vacation, but to acquire knowledge in the land of light. They went home with a few crumbs of knowledge that they taught when they returned to Greece. Let us remember, the Egyptian priests fooled Herodotus concerning the construction of the pyramid with cranes. The Greeks extracted from the Egyptians some formulas on concrete manufacturing and some architectural bases to build their first temple. The architecture of the Temple of Djoser, built 2,400 years earlier, was faithfully copied by the Greeks. The Athena Temple, the Parthenon, and Erechtheion were made of limestone concrete. The marble was also cast and not cut. This process was copied later by the Romans. But that was not enough for them, because the Egyptian savants did not reveal much. It was becoming crucial for the Greeks to get their hands on Egypt. All united around Alexander of Macedonia, the Greeks left to invade Egypt. After Alexander defeated the Persians in Granicus, his primary objective was to invade. No, Egypt. For the Greeks, Alexander deserved his name, the Great. After his death, his best friend Ptolemy settled in Egypt as king and never again returned in Greece. It's as if the head of the village became the head of Silicon Valley overnight. Such were Greece and Egypt at that time. His children, his grandchildren, entire Ptolemaic dynasties reigned in Egypt. Certainly, the Greeks would not have chosen to settle in the Third World. The Romans took their turn at seizing this knowledge, built their cities and their empire. We hear about cement and Roman concrete, but before being Roman, this concrete was Egyptian. Hundreds of Roman temples were quickly erected all around the Mediterranean Sea. The construction of the Colosseum lasted 10 years. To the west, the Roman Forum was completed in 8 years. It would have taken at least 200 years to build them out of carved stones. We know how to recognize a poured stone thanks to the insertion of an object which has no place being there, as in the example of the Pyramid of Medum. Lugdunum, now known as Lyon, there is ancient theater built during the reign of Augustus. On this site we see granite, limestone, and andesite blocks. They are arranged in a precise way like in Cuzco and like in Egypt, where a sheet of paper could not be slipped between them. These are amalgamated ores and poured in geopolymer concrete. At the very back, we find stones of the building containing pieces of iron. They were incorporated while the concrete was still fresh. The Greeks used a similar technique. They incorporated an iron frame to reinforce the concrete. Here is Baalbek, whose immense stones caused so much ink to flow. These famous stones do not belong to distant ancient civilizations. The Baalbek stones are part of the temple. They were poured on site by the Romans, like the rest of the temple. They were neither cut nor moved. 600 meters below is the stone of the pregnant woman. Below and next to it are 2 other stones of the same size in limestone concrete. These are the foundation of a new temple in continuation of Baalbek, but this project was abandoned. It is the work of the Greco-Romans and not that of a civilization which disappeared 12,000 years ago. The entire Roman Empire was built of limestone concrete. The Egyptians' technique to melt granite remained secret to the general public. Like all the rest of the empire, Egypt was plundered in its turn. After the conquest of Egypt, many Egyptian obelisks were taken to Europe, mainly in Rome. Later, ignoring the significance of the stories carved on obelisks, they added their crosses. The tools to extract and grind the minerals were enhanced and performed better and better. The Order of the Knights Templar, called the Guardians of the Temple, was actually an order of concrete temple builders. They gave themselves over to the church after being massacred in 1312. Requests to make churches, theaters, cultural centers, buildings, public and private, continued to grow. The financial stakes were enormous. Many concrete construction companies were born all over Europe. They were called the Freemason in England, and in France the Franc-Maçon, the Compagnon de Devoir, and others the Maître Comencini. Over the centuries, they came together to form a single international body, the Freemasons. They enacted a sacred rule: the plans, the information, the archives of each building will be kept secret, hidden from the general public. They invented the legend of carving stone for the average person, common mortals. Extracting the minerals to make concrete became easier. The composition of the mixtures improved, and the limestone extraction process, grinding, lime manufacturing, was gradually industrialized. The Church, therefore the Vatican, placed orders to make basilicas and cathedrals, and the Freemasons built them out of concrete. Everyone wins. The Church propagated the legend of the carved stone made from the suffering and sweat of the faithful. Thousands of faithful Catholics carried by their immense faith who cut stones for the glory of the Holy Church. When we visit these monuments, we are both amazed but also doubtful, with a feeling that something is wrong. In fact, the builders did not suffer as much by cutting stones as you might imagine. They were not the faithful of the Church that built them, but rather specialized and organized teams, masters of architecture and concrete. The Freemasons poured concrete not only for the Church, but also for the kings, dukes, counts, for different kingdoms, big and small, and all kinds of buildings. The most important sponsor at the time was the Vatican. Another way to distinguish a cut stone from a cast stone is the imprint of tissue. Some masons used linen fabrics so that the concrete could be easily detached from the formwork mold. These imprints are found in all buildings. These marks are visible on the first row, that is to say, the first stones laid at the start of the construction. Sometimes they mixed shells in the concrete like the ancient Egyptians. Concrete flowed freely all over Europe and around the world. It is enough to observe the first foundations of the buildings to understand that there never were cut stones. Egyptian concrete was not only used for churches, but for all infrastructure. From 1700 to 1900, hundreds of cathedrals were built, thousands of bridges, public and private buildings in all European cities. The Basilica of Notre-Dame de Fouvrières in Lyon is an example of different mixtures. We find here all kinds of concrete. Even the granite is poured. Don't go looking. There is no document on its construction. The tourist book explicitly says that the basilica is made of pierre de taille. Pierre de taille, large stones. Pierre taillé, carved stones. A subtle difference in French leaves room for confusion. There is no photo showing the stones being transported or lifted. We are in the real estate and concrete era. But at the same time, it is important to uphold the myth of cut stone. Freemasons have kept this secret for hundreds of years. One last visit.
I heard that the Clermont-Ferrand Cathedral was built with cut black volcanic stone from the surrounding area. I went there. After a quick examination, I found that this stone had also been poured. I observed the first row. Fabric and prints. Everything was poured. I decided to stop looking for cut stone. There aren't any.
Certainly, the cathedral is undoubtedly built in stone, but they are artificial stones and not carved stones. This is the true story of the philosopher's stone, which we so often hear about. The human being replaces nature by effortlessly creating stones which express the complexity of chemistry and reveal universal dimensions, knowledge kept and discreetly transmitted. The use of sacred geometry in construction from Egyptian knowledge was preserved and transmitted in secret. Only a few initiated architects had the privilege of accessing it. Masons applied sacred architecture and Egyptian thought by integrating universal constants in all buildings. The architects of the cathedrals deployed the meter, pi, the golden ratio, and the royal cubit. If we take measurements in churches and cathedrals, we find these units everywhere. To conclude, the Freemasons were never stonemasons, but a body of builders, architects, chemists, and mathematicians who used concrete. Even today, Negro Egypt continues to be discreetly honored by the Freemasons in thanks for the immense gift received from them. Besides, the Freemasons paid tribute to the Egyptians and Africans by contributing to the abolition of one of the most shameful practices of humanity, maintained by kings and the church for centuries: slavery. They helped Black Africa to raise their heads little by little. This is not a coincidence. It is indeed the blueprint of the Amun-Re Temple in Luxor, replicated with loyalty in the Louvre and the Tuileries Garden in the heart of Paris. Why did the Egyptian civilization disappear? They didn't disappear, but some migrated to India for a milder climate. Those who stayed behind kept their knowledge secret, but their pacifism was fatal. They had not developed a powerful army. All those who visited Egypt left dazzled by the land of light. Over the centuries, the knowledge of Imhotep and the Egyptians escaped and spread throughout the entire world. Their knowledge was not lost, it was shared, sometimes taken by force by the Persians, the Greeks, the Philistines, the Romans, the whole world. It was passed on from generation to generation. For almost 3,000 years, Imhotep was worshipped as a god. Pilgrims came every year from all over the world until the year 350, the date when Constantine decided to convert the whole empire to Christianity. From that time on, the temples dedicated to the prophet Imhotep were destroyed and the priests slaughtered. Ancient pagan and Egyptian beliefs were all erased. Imhotep was replaced by Jesus Christ and was forgotten. The Imhotep Treaty was replaced by the Hippocratic Oath. Afro-Egyptians were seen as gods by the people they encountered. We now realize who these aliens and gods are. They were the first scientists of humanity, the fathers of chemistry, physics, math, and geometry. The Egyptians founded modern civilization. The Nile was doubly sacred. It offered food, but not only. The Nile gave them the most precious thing in the world: the time. Time, 4 months per year to reflect and observe. Time for science. What is science? What is the definition of science itself? Science is experimental, verifiable, and visible. Thousands of books were written, each proposing a hypothesis to exclude the Egyptians and put in place an extraterrestrial civilization. Atlanteans, missing astronauts, or slaves. That's fiction, fantasy, not science. There is no evidence to prove the existence of the aliens. Without playing with words, with semantics, without philosophizing, the fact of not having scientific evidence is already proof. For thousands of years, we have been alone on Earth, and we will remain so for a long time, alone, facing ourselves. These theorists, who advanced ignorance and obscurantism, now belong to the dustbin of history. The dustbin of history is there to store these books and these theories. Above all, not to make them disappear, so that humanity can form its own opinion. To believe that development and human intelligence came from elsewhere is beautiful. It's romantic. We don't want to be alone in the universe, but it's not the truth. A myth disappears, and more precisely, that of an unknown civilization. The truth is that this mysterious and greatly developed civilization was Egypt. If there is an obscured truth, it is that this Egypt was Negro. They discovered solar energy. Without solar energy, there would have been no Great Pyramid. Afro-Egyptians discovered that the Earth was round, and they were the first to have traveled and explore it up and down. Whenever a civilization was brought into contact with Egypt, temples arose, and that civilization was propelled forward. A myth was born, that of cut stone. Humanity was built with all forms of concrete and not with cut stone. The ancient history of Egypt, Africa, Asia, and America must be fully rewritten. Before Michelangelo's sculptures, there was Egyptian perfection. Tell me again about the Mona Lisa's mysterious smile. I say, look instead at the enigmatic smile of Ramses II. Are you looking for Atlanteans? Here they are. They are in Egypt. With chemistry and physics, math and geometry in tandem, Negro Egypt allowed us to build temples, streets, houses, sports stadiums, enough to build humanity. They laid the pillars of science, the first alphabet, art, philosophy, medicine, and religions. They are at the origin of the cultures of the world. They created the cultures of the world. That is the greatest mystery of humanity. Wherever they settled, they built a temple, and later a city was born. Let's ask the right question. Should we put an end to the mystery of the pyramids maintained by some Egyptologists? Egypt has an important task, that of preserving the cradle of humanity. It is the duty of all countries to help, because if you do not have a past, you will not have a future. Imhotep was the greatest scientist of humanity, and the Negroes of Africa gave their knowledge, chemistry, architecture, geometry, mathematics to all other peoples. And in return, what did they receive as a reward? Centuries of slavery, suffering, misery, massacres, and it never ends. The looting and insult to Africa continue today. What if we finally all share our riches? It's time for humanity to mature.